Have you heard the term Bregret? It's a popularised term in British media to state the obvious: regret after Brexit. The results of the 2016 referendum on the United Kingdom's membership in the largest European coalition were narrow but definitive. 51.89% of the United Kingdom had decided that the UK would leave the coalition. It took 4 years to get there, but Great Britain formally exited the EU in 2020, making a new era in its politico-economic landscape. Naturally, those who voted to leave believed that it was the right thing to do, motivated by compelling arguments and fierce speech by Leave politicians. It seemed like the right thing to do. But was it the right thing after all? Cue the term Bregret. Many of the UK now believe that it was the wrong move. How many? While reports vary, a poll by Statista shows that as of May 2024, 55% of the population regretted their decision, 31% did not, and the rest stated that they did not know if it was the right or wrong decision to leave the EU. The regret could stem from several factors: rising inflation and unemployment rates, the end of free movement for the British public, exit from the EU single market, and a multitude of factors. However, it all boils down to the same thing. None of the things they were promised ended up happening. At least that's what the sizable majority believes. So now we have to look back at the politicians who made those bold claims and promises in the first place and ask them, do they regret their decision to advocate for leaving the European Union when they really should have chanted to stay instead? That's what we're here to talk about today. Did Brexit happen in a day? That's something to remember as we talk about the events that led to the UK's decision to withdraw from the EU. In 2013, David Cameron announced that the people of Great Britain would be given a say in whether the country should stay or exit the coalition. In the lead up to the announcement, several people had raised concerns about British sovereignty or how it was under threat because of the EU's unified system approach. That would be one reason, however. Others brought up concerns over a lack of regulatory freedom, immigration control, the country's financial contributions towards the EU budget, political independence, and a host of other reasons. Simply, a sizable portion of the UK's population had called on Cameron, who'd assumed premiership in 2010, to withdraw from the coalition. Euroscepticism, to be fair, had existed in the country long before Cameron assumed office. So how did Cameron become one of the many faces behind Brexit? Simply, he was the first person to actually call for a referendum since 1975. In 2013, as Cameron anticipated another political run, he stated that the British people must have their say. He announced plans to hold a referendum with one question: should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? The move was controversial for several reasons. Many believed that the Conservative Party was threatened by the Independence Party's impressive polling numbers. Then leader of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband, accused Cameron of attempting to put Britain through years of uncertainty just to regain premiership. Cameron responded, claiming that his decision was based on rising Euroscepticism in the country and belief that the people needed to be given a voice. Interestingly, the results of the referendum were technically legally non-binding due to parliamentary sovereignty. Still, Cameron promised that the majority's decision would be upheld in any case. As for why he was waiting till after the Conservative Party won in the next general election, Cameron claimed that was because of the lingering effects of the Eurozone crisis. It was impractical to go forward with the referendum at that point in time. Ultimately, the Conservative Party won, and Cameron announced the referendum would be held on the 23rd of June 2016. The many faces of Brexit. Did Cameron anticipate winning? No, he was optimistic. Yes. Did he anticipate holding up his end of the bargain? Yes, there was no way around it. But did he anticipate Brexit taking place? You'd be surprised by this. No, he did not. Many had questioned Cameron's decision to hold the referendum, with France and Germany warning the UK to not cherry-pick its membership in the coalition. Still, Cameron had given his word and he had to uphold it. The referendum had to take place. It did, and the majority voted to leave. This prompted two major political events. One was socio-eco-political, and that was Brexit. The other was David Cameron's announcement a month later, in July 2016, that he was resigning from the premiership.
On Wednesday, I would attend the House of Commons for Prime Minister's questions, and then after that, I expect to go to the Palace and offer my resignation, so we'll have a new Prime Minister in that building behind me by Wednesday evening. Thank you very much. Right.
Years later, Cameron still believes that calling for a referendum was the right move. He claimed that it was a hotly contested issue that was brought up in the House of Commons for several years and that the British public needed to have a say. Still, the former Prime Minister was holding out hope that the masses would vote to stay. To be fair, in the race to the referendum, several polls showed that the British public would rather stay in the European Union. An overwhelming majority in Scotland and Northern Ireland wanted to stay, and this was reflected in the polling results in June 2016 as well. However, England, as the largest majority, determined which way the vote would go, and they wanted to leave. The Prime Minister had vigorously campaigned in the contentious referendum on Britain's EU membership, attending numerous public events across the country to argue that Brexit would result in economic self-harm. I was absolutely clear about my belief that Britain is stronger, safer, and better off inside the EU. I made clear the referendum was about this and this alone, not the future of any single politician, including myself. But the British people made a different decision to take a different path. As such, I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction, Cameron said. The former BM stated that it would be best for his successor to negotiate the terms of Britain's exit and to trigger Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, which begins the formal withdrawal process, adding that he had already discussed his intentions with the Queen. As far as Cameron's opinion on Brexit goes, he was never in favour to begin with. He advocated for the UK to remain, but ultimately conceded defeat when the people voted to leave. In his book, For the Record, Cameron called Brexit his biggest regret. Next came Theresa May, the candidate who took up the premiership uncontested after Cameron resigned and Andrea Leadsom withdrew from the running. May served as the PM from 2016 until 2019, which was 1 year until Brexit officially took effect. To suggest that May was stalling the inevitable wouldn't be wholly inaccurate, but it's not entirely accurate either. May wasn't in support of Brexit, but she believed that it had to be done and made sure that withdrawal from the EU went ahead as seamlessly as possible. While Boris Johnson has often been seen as the driving force of Brexit, May was the one who negotiated with the EU and deliberated on the terms of withdrawal. Yes, the UK could have exited without any terms per se. Still, May worked out negotiations to ensure that the member states of the EU and the newly withdrawn UK remain on friendly terms. This was controversial, and the Brexit terms were rejected several times over by members of even her own party in a vote of no confidence before they were agreed upon later. Still, May was instrumental in Brexit, although most of her time as PM was spent convincing people that she was determined to make it happen. And that might have been because she was also focused on how Scotland would react. In hindsight, May might have been one of the very few Conservative politicians with foresight. Scotland did vote to remain in the EU, which was ultimately vetoed by the majority population in England, a fact that the Scottish National Party then brought up in several debates to advocate for Scottish independence. The Scottish people wanted a say in how the UK conducted its affairs. They wanted another referendum. This one on Scotland's independence. It was rejected by Boris Johnson, who believed that the last referendum held in 2014 still held merit. Speaking of which, Johnson became the literal man of the people when May's Brexit proposals were rejected several times over. When she resigned in 2019, Johnson assumed office. For many, he was the real face of Brexit. Boris Johnson made it happen, but does he regret Brexit? Johnson's influence on Brexit began long before the 2016 referendum. As a journalist and later as the editor of The Spectator, he consistently voiced skepticism about the European Union, framing it as a bureaucratic and undemocratic institution infringing on British sovereignty. His decision was crucial. As one of the most recognisable and popular politicians in the UK, his support lent the Leave campaign significant credibility and media attention. Johnson's energetic campaigning style, marked by memorable soundbites and a knack for connecting with ordinary voters, helped galvanise public support for Brexit. Taking away all that fancy jargon, Boris Johnson was the Leave campaign. His famous £350 million a week claim, suggesting that this money could be redirected from the EU to the National Health Service, became a central and controversial theme of the campaign. Although widely criticised for its accuracy, the message was effective in shifting the debate towards issues of national sovereignty and public spending. He was appointed Foreign Secretary in Theresa May's government, where he continued to advocate for a hard Brexit. His resignation from this post in 2018, citing disagreements with May's Brexit strategy, highlighted his commitment to a decisive break from the EU. This move positioned him as a key figure among hardline Brexiteers and set the stage for his eventual bid for the Conservative Party leadership. In July 2019, Johnson became Prime Minister with a clear mandate to get Brexit done. He renegotiated the withdrawal agreement, removing the contentious Irish backstop and replacing it with a different arrangement that satisfied many Brexiteers. Johnson then called a general election in December 2019, framing it as a necessary step to resolve the Brexit impasse. His Conservative Party won a landslide victory, giving him the parliamentary majority needed to pass his Brexit deal. Under Johnson's leadership, the UK officially left the EU on January 31st, 2020. But what now? Well, Johnson continued the trend of resigning PMs when he announced his decision to do the same in 2022 in the wake of the Partygate scandal. However, at the time of his resignation, he remained a keen believer that Brexit was the right move for the UK. But did he ever believe it? A stream of allegations followed Johnson after Partygate, making it the least of his concerns. In particular, his advocacy on Brexit was questioned. Goto Hari, the former Director of Communications, confirmed that Johnson never cared whether the UK stayed or exited the coalition. Many remember Johnson's captivating column in 2016 for the Daily Telegraph that talked about all the reasons why he believed it was in everyone's best interest to leave the EU. Right? He'd actually composed a second column just in case the referendum results were different. Hari confirmed that there were two columns altogether, tailored to what the majority wanted. Hari actually went a step further and claimed that the former PM massively regretted his support for Brexit. Johnson has never stated anything as such, though. What does Brexit mean for Keir Starmer? The voice of reason when Brexit was taking place after Johnson had announced the withdrawal in 2020 was David Frost, literally. He was the key negotiator between the UK and the EU. To backtrack a little, Cameron knew that a referendum had to take place, even though he was optimistic most people would vote to remain. Still, he knew that everyone was unhappy and had mapped out a list of demands or reforms for how the UK would conduct business with the EU should the nation ultimately vote to stay. Namely, the single market was a great asset. Cameron believed it, and so did Frost. In fact, Frost practically pleaded with Leave campaigners to consider the economic turmoil that would result in exiting the single market. He stated that people needed to go ahead with a lot more realism and be motivated less by emotion. Well, that didn't happen, and the UK did leave the single market. You'd think this would serve as a reminder to Lord Frost that Brexit was the wrong move. And you'd be wrong. Frost actually believes that Brexit is working.
That I think it is working.
In his keynote speech titled Brexit 6 Years On, Is It Working?, Lord Frost argued that Brexit has partially delivered on its promise of restoring UK sovereignty and democracy, although it remains incomplete due to ongoing financial obligations to the EU and the residual jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Frost emphasised that the UK is now better positioned to tailor its trade policies and regulations to its own needs. potentially boosting investment and productivity. However, he acknowledged that replacing lost EU trade would take time and emphasised the need for continued reforms to maximise Brexit's benefits. And now let's talk about the man of the hour, Keir Starmer. The lawyer turned politician who went on to become the leader of the Labour Party and, as of 2024, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, was a key figure during Brexit talks starting in 2016.
You're right to say that we want to improve relations with the EU. We think we can get a better deal than the botched deal that Boris Johnson brought home, and we will work on that, understanding the work that needs to be done and the nature of the challenge. But yes, we do want to improve that relationship. In the meantime, we do have to get on with implementing the important changes that are necessary under the existing arrangements that we've got, because we're not going to be able to get a better relationship unless we demonstrate a commitment to the relationship and the agreements that have already been put in place. So we'll be doing both of those things, but we do that with a very strong mandate now, a very strong mandate for change, for a different relationship with the EU, a different way of doing politics, and we go forward in that spirit.
You heard it from the man himself. His words improve on the deal that was made in 2020. Starmer, along with then leader of the Labour Party Jeremy Corbyn, opposed Theresa May's Brexit exit strategies, stating that it was not in the best interests of the people of the United Kingdom. This wasn't to suggest they didn't believe Brexit shouldn't have gone forward. While it's fair to say the majority of Labour politicians were Remain campaigners, they weren't rigid. When the Labour Party, under Corbyn, was running in the election, they promised people a new vote to decide on Brexit and how it would pan out, if at all. What happened? The Labour Party saw worse election results for the first time since 1935. When Keir took over the reins, he understood that there was no way out of Brexit. Although was the leader of the opposition, he made it known that he believed the Conservative Party was botching the Brexit deal. Again, his main concern was trade with the EU. After a new statement allowed for trade to carry on, Keir claimed that he was still unhappy with how Johnson had left the whole thing to the last minute. Many criticised the Labour Party, believing that the party was causing a hindrance in what was meant to happen. The people had voted, they'd made their decision, and it was time for the politicians to honour it. So even though many argue that Keir was part of the Remain group, he complied, and Brexit happened in 2020. Today, however, the new Prime Minister regrets not fighting the terms of the country's exit from the coalition more fiercely. While the British were unhappy with the coalition for more reasons than some, and definitely enough to warrant stern negotiation with members of the European Union, was Brexit really necessary? What do you think?